I never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd question everything about his life at 32, but here I am. My name's Adam, and if I had to describe myself in one word, it would be dependable. I've spent my entire life trying to be the glue that holds things together, whether it's at work, in my marriage, or with my family. People always say I'm the one who can handle anything, the peacekeeper who avoids conflict and makes sure everyone is happy. But lately I've been wondering if that's a compliment or a curse. Let me tell you about my family. First there's Mark, my older brother. He's successful in every way you can imagine: big house, fancy car, and a job that makes people nod in approval when they hear about it. Growing up, he was the golden child, and honestly, I don't think he ever really stepped out of that role. Then there's Claire, my younger sister. She's a free spirit, the type of person who lights up every room she walks into. Everyone adores her. She has this charm that lets her get away with anything, and responsibility just seems to slide off her like water off a duck's back. My parents, Karen and Robert, are, well, complicated. They're good people, don't get me wrong, but they have this way of making family togetherness feel like a chore. They insist on weekly lunches and constant updates about our lives, which sounds nice in theory, but in practice, it's exhausting. My mom, Karen, is the type who meddles in everyone's business under the guise of helping. My dad, Robert, is quieter, but when he does speak, it's usually something blunt that cuts straight to the point. They mean, well, I guess, but their version of support often feels more like judgment. And then there's Emily, my wife. We've been married for 8 years. I met her in college, and back then, it felt like I'd won the lottery. She's smart, funny, and beautiful, everything I could have ever hoped for. Our marriage has been stable for the most part, but lately things have been different. Emily has been distant. She's quieter than usual, and when she does speak, it feels like she's holding back. 2 weeks ago, we had an argument, one of those big ones where everything comes out. She said something that's been replaying in my mind ever since. Maybe we should just get a divorce. At the time, I thought it was just something she said in the heat of the moment, but now I'm not so sure. Since that night, I've been doing everything I can to fix things. I've been more attentive, cutting back on work hours, and trying to show her how much she means to me. But nothing seems to be working. It's like there's this wall between us, and no matter what I do, I can't break through. I've been telling myself that she's just stressed or going through something she doesn't know how to talk about, but deep down, I'm starting to wonder if it's more than that. Today, I decided to clear my head. My parents were hosting one of their usual family lunches, and I thought maybe spending time with them would help take my mind off things. It's funny how we trick ourselves into thinking certain environments are comforting when, in reality, they're anything but. Still, I went. When I arrived, Mark and Claire were already there, lounging in the living room with my mom and dad. Everyone looked up when I walked in, but there was this weird tension in the air. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something felt off. "Adam, can you grab the pie from the car?" "I forgot it," my mom asked. I nodded, happy to have a moment to myself. As I walked toward the driveway, I realized I'd left my keys on the kitchen counter. I turned back, planning to grab them and head out, but just as I reached the living room, I heard my name. It stopped me in my tracks. I know I shouldn't have eavesdropped, but the tone of their voices made my heart sink. "Honestly, I don't know how Emily lasted this long with him," Mark said. His voice was casual, like he was discussing the weather. "She's way out of his league," Claire added, laughing softly. "I always thought she deserved someone more exciting." My mom sighed and said something that stung more than I care to admit. "I love Adam, but he's just so oblivious sometimes. Emily probably feels like she's raising a third child." And then, my dad chimed in with the finishing blow. Divorce might actually be a good thing for them. It's not like Adam was ever a great match for her. Hearing those words was like getting punched in the gut. I wanted to walk in and demand an explanation, but I couldn't move. My feet felt glued to the floor, and my chest was tight. This was my family, the people who were supposed to have my back, and they were tearing me apart like I wasn't even human. I stayed there, frozen, listening to every word they said. A part of me kept hoping someone would defend me, but no one did. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I turned and walked back outside, pretending I hadn't heard anything. But the damage was done. As I stood in the driveway, pretending to look for my keys, I realized something. My life wasn't just falling apart with Emily. It was crumbling everywhere, and I didn't know how to fix it. That day was the beginning of everything unraveling. I didn't know it at the time, but the betrayal I felt in that moment would set off a chain of events that would force me to face the truth. Not just about my family, but about myself. I've always believed that if something's broken, you should try to fix it. That's how I've approached my life, and it's how I've been handling my marriage with Emily these past few weeks. Ever since she brought up the word divorce, I've been doing everything I can to show her how much she means to me. I've been more attentive, cutting back on late nights at work, and even trying to listen better when she talks about her day. I've been trying so hard that sometimes I catch myself wondering if she even notices. But no matter what I do, it feels like Emily is slipping further away. She's been so quiet lately, and when I ask her if something's wrong, she just says she's tired. I tell myself that maybe she's just stressed. It's been a tough year for both of us. But deep down, I can't shake the feeling that there's something else. Something she's not telling me. I've spent so many nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, and wondering if I'm the problem. Am I not enough? Is she unhappy with me? The questions keep piling up, but the answers feel just out of reach. This morning, I decided I needed a break from my thoughts. My parents were hosting one of their usual family lunches, and I figured it might help to be around familiar faces, even if only for a little while. My family has its quirks, but they've always been my safe space. Or at least I thought they were. I got to my parents' house just before noon. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Mark's car parked neatly in its usual spot. Of course, he was already here. Mark is the type who's always early to everything, probably to remind everyone how dependable he is. When I walked into the living room, I saw Mark and Claire sitting on the couch with my mom and dad. They all looked up when I entered, but something felt off. Their smiles didn't quite reach their eyes, and the room was unusually quiet. Normally, Claire would be cracking jokes or showing off some new story from her latest adventure, but today, she seemed distracted. I chalked it up to one of those weird family dynamics and didn't think much of it. Adam, can you do me a favor? My mom, Karen, said. She was busy arranging plates on the dining table. I left the pie in the car. Could you grab it for me? Sure, I said, happy to step outside for a moment. The tension in the room was starting to get to me, even though I couldn't explain why. I grabbed my jacket and headed out the front door. The January air was crisp, and I took a deep breath, hoping it would clear my mind. As I walked to the car, I patted my pockets for my keys and realized they weren't there. Great, I muttered under my breath. I must have left them inside. I turned around and headed back to the house, trying to remember where I'd set them down. The living room door was slightly ajar, and as I approached, I heard something that made me freeze in my tracks. Honestly, I don't know how Emily lasted this long with him. Mark's voice was clear and confident, as usual. My stomach dropped. Was he talking about me? Claire's voice followed, light and casual, like she was commenting on the weather. She's way out of his league. I've always thought she deserved someone more. Exciting. I felt my hands clench into fists, but I couldn't move. My heart pounded in my chest as my mom chimed in. I love Adam, but he's just so oblivious sometimes. Emily probably feels like she's raising a third child. A lump formed in my throat, but the words kept coming. My dad, Robert, who rarely said much, added his opinion. Divorce might actually be the best thing for them. It's not like Adam was ever a great match for her. I stood there, frozen, unable to believe what I was hearing. These weren't strangers gossiping about me behind my back. This was my family, people who were supposed to love and support me, and they were tearing me apart like I wasn't even there. For a moment, I thought about bursting in and confronting them. I wanted to demand answers to make them see how much their words hurt. But instead, I stood there, listening, hoping that someone, anyone, would defend me. But no one did. The silence that followed their comments was almost worse than the words themselves. It was like a confirmation that they all agreed, that this was how they truly saw me. Eventually, I turned and walked back outside, pretending I hadn't heard anything. I leaned against the car, staring at nothing, trying to process what had just happened. My family, the people I thought would always have my back, had betrayed me in a way I couldn't have imagined. And the worst part was, I couldn't even be angry with them. Deep down, I felt like maybe they were right. Maybe I wasn't enough for Emily. Maybe I was as oblivious and unworthy as they thought. But another part of me, a smaller, quieter part, refused to accept it. I wasn't ready to give up on myself, or my marriage. Not yet. What I didn't realize then was that this moment was just the beginning. Things were about to get a lot more complicated, and I wasn't sure I was ready for what was coming next. As I stood outside the living room door, the sound of my brother Mark's voice stopped me in my tracks. Honestly, I don't know how Emily lasted this long with him, he said casually, as if he were discussing the plot of a TV show. For a second, I thought I must have misheard him. Surely he wasn't talking about me, right? But then Claire's voice chimed in, confirming my worst fear. She's way out of his league, Claire said with a small laugh. I always thought she deserved someone more. Exciting. My chest tightened, and I felt my breath catch. My heart started to pound, but my feet stayed frozen to the spot. I wanted to burst into the room and demand an explanation, but instead I stayed rooted to the floor, unable to do anything but listen. Then I heard my mom, Karen, sigh heavily. I love Adam, but he's just so oblivious sometimes. Emily probably feels like she's raising a third child. A third child. Her words echoed in my mind, each one sharper than the last. My family, the people I had always relied on for support, were sitting in the next room dissecting my marriage like it was some kind of group project. I kept telling myself that this had to be some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe I had walked in on the tail end of a conversation and missed the context. Maybe they were talking about someone else. But then I heard my dad, Robert, chime in. He rarely spoke during family discussions, so when he did, it usually carried weight. Divorce might actually be a good thing for them, he said quietly, as if trying not to upset anyone. It's not like Adam was ever a great match for her. And just like that, any hope I had of misunderstanding the situation vanished. There was no mistaking it now they were talking about me. My heart sank, and I felt a cold, heavy weight settle in my chest. These were the people I had spent my entire life trying to please, the ones I thought would always have my back. And here they were, tearing me apart without a second thought. For a moment, I considered walking away. Maybe it was better not to hear anymore. But another part of me, the part that couldn't let go of the hope that someone might come to my defense, kept me glued to the spot. I stayed, listening to every word, hoping for some glimmer of support. But it never came. The conversation moved on, but the damage was done. My family's words played over and over in my head, each one cutting deeper than the last. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was this how they really saw me? A burden to Emily? A disappointment in my own marriage? It wasn't just what they said about me that hurt, it was the way they said it. So casual, so matter of fact, as if my failures were some undeniable truth that they had all silently agreed on. There was no hesitation, no concern for how their words might feel if I ever found out. It was like I wasn't even a real person to them, just a subject for debate. I wanted to storm into the room and confront them. To ask Mark what made him think he had the right to comment on my marriage. To demand an explanation from Claire about why she thought I wasn't good enough for my own wife. To tell my mom how much it hurt to hear her compare me to a child. and to ask my dad why he thought divorce was the solution to my problems instead of support. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I stayed frozen in place, caught in this surreal moment where my world felt like it was crumbling around me, my hands clenched into fists, and I tried to focus on the sound of my breathing to keep myself calm. But no matter how hard I tried, the anger and humiliation bubbling inside me were impossible to ignore. After what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to step away. I turned and walked back toward the driveway, my mind racing. I didn't even care about the pie anymore. I needed to get out of there, to put some distance between myself and the people who had just shattered my sense of security. I stood outside, leaning against the car, and tried to make sense of what had just happened. A part of me wanted to believe it was all a bad dream, that I'd wake up and realize none of it was real. But the voices, their words, kept echoing in my head, reminding me that this was my reality now. As much as I wanted to stay angry at them, I couldn't help but turn some of that anger inward. Was this my fault? Had I been so blind to my own shortcomings that I didn't realize how others saw me? Maybe I really was oblivious. Maybe I wasn't the husband Emily deserved. Maybe my family wasn't just being cruel, they were being honest. But another part of me, a smaller, quieter part, refused to accept that. I had tried so hard to be a good husband, a good son, a good brother. I had sacrificed so much for my family, and this was how they saw me. This was what they thought of me. It didn't seem fair. I stood there for what felt like hours, trying to sort through the mess of emotions swirling in my head. Hurt, anger, betrayal, self-doubt, they all fought for space in my mind, leaving me feeling more lost and alone than ever. And as much as I wanted to confront my family, to tell them how much they had hurt me, I knew I wasn't ready. Not yet. That day, I learned something I never wanted to know. Sometimes, the people you trust the most are the ones who can hurt you the deepest. And no matter how much it breaks your heart, you have to face the truth, even if it means questioning everything you thought you knew. I don't know what came over me, but as I stood outside by the car, a wave of anger and hurt boiled up inside me. I couldn't just walk away, not this time. Their words kept echoing in my head, cutting deeper with every replay. I thought about all the times I'd been there for my family, all the sacrifices I'd made, and now this was how they talked about me when they thought I wasn't listening. I couldn't stay silent anymore. Before I knew it, my feet were carrying me back into the house. The living room door creaked open as I stepped inside. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. Everyone turned to look at me, their faces a mix of shock and guilt. For a moment, no one said a word. The silence was suffocating, but I wasn't about to let them off the hook that easily. "Is this what you all think of me?" I asked, my voice louder than I intended. That I'm not good enough for my own wife? That Emily deserves someone more exciting? That I'm oblivious? Or I turned to my mom, some kind of child? Karen, my mom, was the first to respond. She stood up, hands raised as if to calm me down. "Adam, sweetheart, it's not what you think," she said quickly. "We're just worried about you. That's all." "Worried about me?" I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "You think calling me a third child and saying my wife should leave me is worrying about me?" She flinched at my words but didn't say anything. I turned to Mark and Claire, who were both avoiding eye contact like kids caught cheating on a test. "And you too?" I said, pointing at them. "What's your excuse?" "Mark, you said Emily shouldn't have lasted this long with me. Claire, you think she deserves someone better. Is that how little you think of me?" Mark cleared his throat but didn't look up. "Adam, it's not like that," he muttered. "We were just talking. I snapped. "Do you even hear yourselves? You weren't talking, you were tearing me apart. My marriage isn't some casual topic for your little gossip session." Claire finally spoke up, her voice defensive. "Adam, you're overreacting. It wasn't meant to be serious. We were just—" She stopped mid-sentence when she saw the look on my face. "Not serious?" I said, my voice shaking now. "How is calling me a failure in my marriage not serious? How is saying Emily should leave me not serious?" The room fell silent again. My dad, Robert, who had been sitting quietly in his chair this whole time, finally spoke. "You weren't supposed to hear that," he said bluntly, not even looking at me. I let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, so that makes it better? That I wasn't supposed to hear how my own family thinks I'm a disappointment? Thanks, Dad, that really clears things up." Karen stepped forward again, her voice softer now. "Adam, we didn't mean to hurt you. We're just worried about how things have been between you and Emily. She's talked to me a little about your struggles and we were just concerned." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. "So this is what you do when you're concerned?" I asked, my voice cracking. "You sit around and judge me? Tear me down when I'm already struggling? Do you have any idea what it's like to feel like you're losing the person you love most in the world? And instead of supporting me, this is what I get." Tears were burning in my eyes now, but I refused to let them fall. I looked at each of them, waiting for someone to say something, to apologize, to take responsibility. But no one did. Karen looked like she wanted to say more but couldn't find the words. Mark and Claire still wouldn't meet my eyes. And Robert just sat there, staring at the floor. "I thought you were supposed to be my support system," I said, my voice barely above a whisper now. "But all you've done is make me feel small. Like I don't even matter. I've always tried to be there for you, for all of you. And this is how you see me." The silence in the room was deafening. My chest felt tight, and I knew if I stayed any longer, I was going to break down completely. I couldn't let them see me like that. I couldn't give them the satisfaction. Without another word, I turned and headed for the door. "Adam, wait," Karen called after me. "Please don't leave like this." But I didn't stop. Mark muttered something under his breath, but I didn't care enough to listen. I walked out of the house and straight to my car, my mind spinning. I could hear Karen's voice calling my name one last time, but it faded as I closed the car door behind me. As I sat there, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, I felt a wave of emotions crash over me: anger, sadness, betrayal. These were the people I had trusted most in the world, and they had completely shattered that trust. I had always thought of my family as my safety net, the ones who would catch me when I fell. But now I realized they were the ones pushing me off the edge. With a deep breath, I started the car and drove away. I didn't know where I was going, but one thing was clear: I couldn't stay there. Not with them. Not after what they had said. As I drove, the tears I had been holding back finally spilled over, blurring my vision. I let them fall, knowing that this was only the beginning. Things were about to change, and I wasn't sure I was ready for what came next. I drove home in silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel as tightly as my thoughts were gripping my mind. The echoes of my family's words wouldn't stop playing in my head. She deserves someone more exciting. Emily probably feels like she's raising a third child. Divorce might be a good thing. Every sentence felt like a dagger. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I felt drained, emotionally and physically. The house was quiet when I walked in. Emily wasn't home yet, which gave me a strange sense of relief. I wasn't ready to see her, not yet. I needed time to process what had happened. As I stood in the kitchen, staring blankly at the counter, my mind began to spiral. I replayed moments from my marriage, trying to see if I had been blind to how Emily felt about me. Were there signs I had missed? Times when she needed me, but I wasn't there. I thought about all the late nights at work, the moments I brushed off her concerns, the times I thought I was helping but maybe wasn't. It was a painful reflection, but I couldn't stop myself. My thoughts shifted to my family. How long had they seen me this way? Was this something they always believed, or had it only started recently? I replayed past conversations, family gatherings, and small comments I had brushed off as jokes or misunderstandings. Had I been fooling myself this entire time? I had always thought of my family as my safety net, but now it felt like they had been quietly pulling the strings, controlling how I saw myself. I sat down on the couch, my head in my hands, and let out a deep, shaky breath. I couldn't shake the feeling of humiliation. These were the people I trusted most, and they had ripped me apart like I was nothing. Worse, their words made me question everything about myself. Was I really oblivious? A burden? Was I failing as a husband? The weight of those questions pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. Hours passed, and the house remained silent. The sun had set, and I didn't bother turning on any lights. I just sat there in the dim glow of the streetlights outside, lost in my thoughts. Then I heard the sound of Emily's car pulling into the driveway. My heart sank. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face her, but I knew I couldn't avoid this conversation any longer. When Emily walked through the door, she looked tired. She set her bag down and gave me a small smile. "Hey," she said softly. "You're home early. Everything okay?" Her question hit me like a punch. Everything was far from okay, but I didn't know how to start. "Emily," I began, my voice cracking slightly. "Can we talk?" She paused, looking at me with concern. "Of course. What's going on?" she asked, sitting down across from me. I hesitated for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts. "Do you feel like I'm a burden in this marriage?" The words felt heavy coming out of my mouth, but I needed to know. Emily's eyes widened in surprise. "What? No, Adam, why would you think that?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Because that's what my family seems to think. I overheard them today, Emily. They were talking about us, about me. Mark, Claire, Mom, Dad, they all think you should leave me, that I'm not good enough for you, that I'm useless." Emily looked shocked, her mouth slightly open as she tried to process what I was saying. "Adam, I don't know what to say," she stammered. "I never said anything like that." "Then why do they think it?" I pressed. "Why do they think I'm this terrible husband who doesn't deserve you? Did you tell them something?" Emily's face softened, and she let out a small sigh. "Adam, I've talked to your mom a few times about how I've been feeling. I've been frustrated lately, but I never said anything like what they told you." "Frustrated about what?" I asked, my voice rising slightly. "That I work too much? That I don't do enough around the house? What have you been telling them, Emily?" She hesitated, looking down at her hands. "I've been feeling unsupported," she admitted quietly. "There have been times when I've felt like I'm carrying the weight of everything, at home, in our relationship. But I never said you were a bad husband, Adam. I just needed someone to talk to, and your mom seemed like the easiest person to turn to." Her words stung, but they also made sense. I had been so focused on fixing things that I hadn't stopped to ask her what she really needed. "So you've been confiding in my mom," I said slowly, piecing everything together, "and she's been sharing that with the rest of the family." Emily looked up at me, guilt written all over her face. I didn't think she would tell anyone. I didn't know who else to talk to. I let out a deep breath, leaning back against the couch. "Emily, do you have any idea what it feels like to hear your own family talk about you like that? To hear them say I'm not good enough for you? That you'd be better off without me?" "I'm sorry, Adam," she said softly. "I never wanted this to happen. I never wanted them to think that way about you." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything hanging heavy in the air. Finally, I spoke. "Emily, I know I've made mistakes. I know I haven't always been there the way you needed me to be, but I'm trying so hard. And hearing all of this, it's made me realize how much I've been failing, not just you, but myself." Emily reached out and took my hand, her grip firm but gentle. "I know you're trying, Adam, and I want to try too. I don't want to lose what we have. But we can't keep doing this alone. We need to figure this out together, without everyone else's opinions getting in the way." Her words gave me a small glimmer of hope, but they also reminded me of how much work we had ahead of us. My marriage wasn't just about me and Emily anymore. It had become tangled in the web of my family's opinions and judgments, and if we were going to fix it, I needed to find a way to untangle it. For the first time that day, I felt a small flicker of determination. This wasn't over, not yet, and I wasn't ready to give up. The next morning, I woke up with a knot in my stomach. The events of the previous day were still fresh in my mind, and the weight of my family's words lingered like a dark cloud. I couldn't let this go. I couldn't move forward without confronting them. They needed to understand how much they had hurt me, and I needed answers. Why would they say those things? Did they truly believe I was a failure in my marriage, or were they just speaking out of frustration? I had to know. I texted my mom and asked if we could have a family meeting that evening. She responded quickly, asking if everything was okay. I didn't go into detail, just told her it was important. Within an hour, everyone had agreed to come. It felt strange to be the one calling the shots for once. Usually it was my mom orchestrating family gatherings, but this time it was on my terms. As the day went on, I rehearsed what I wanted to say. I wasn't going to let them twist my words or brush off their actions. This wasn't just about me. It was about setting boundaries and demanding the respect I deserved. When the evening came, I was a mix of nervous and determined. My parents, Mark and Claire, arrived one by one, each of them looking curious but slightly uneasy. They must have sensed that this wasn't going to be a typical family dinner. We all sat down in the living room, and for a moment, the silence was deafening. I decided to start. I wanted to get us all together because something happened yesterday that I can't ignore. I began, my voice steady but firm. I overheard all of you talking about me, about my marriage, about Emily. And what I heard, it hurt me more than I can put into words. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and Claire glanced at the floor. My mom opened her mouth to speak, but I held up a hand to stop her. Please, let me finish, I said. I need to know why you said those things. Do you really think I'm not good enough for my own wife? That I'm some kind of burden in this family? Mark was the first to respond, clearing his throat awkwardly. Look, Adam, I didn't mean to hurt you, he said, avoiding my gaze. I was just repeating some of the things Emily said when she was venting to Mom. I didn't think you'd ever hear it. Repeating things Emily said? I asked, my voice rising slightly. Do you even hear yourself? You took her private frustrations and turned them into an attack on me. Do you realize how damaging that is? I didn't mean for it to come out like that, he said weakly. I was just trying to make sense of things. I turned to Claire next. And you? Saying Emily deserves someone more exciting? Was that your idea of a joke? Claire looked defensive. I wasn't being serious, Adam, she said quickly. You know I have a habit of saying things without thinking. I didn't mean for it to sound so harsh. Harsh? I repeated, my voice thick with emotion. Claire, you basically said my wife is too good for me. How is that not harsh? My mom, Karen, stepped in at that point, her tone soft but strained. Adam, I think you're misunderstanding our intentions, she said. We're just worried about you and Emily. She's been confiding in me a lot lately, and I was trying to help. Help, I said, shaking my head in disbelief. How is tearing me down in front of Mark and Claire supposed to help? You made me sound like a failure, Mom. Like I'm incapable of being a good husband. My dad, Robert, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke. We didn't mean for you to hear any of that, he said bluntly. It was a private conversation. I let out a bitter laugh. So that makes it okay? That I wasn't supposed to hear how little faith you all have in me? Dad, you didn't even try to defend me. You just sat there and said divorce might be a good thing. Do you have any idea how that feels? The room fell silent again, the weight of my words hanging heavy in the air. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. This isn't just about what you said yesterday, I continued. It's about the fact that you think it's okay to meddle in my life like this. My marriage is between me and Emily. It's not your place to dissect it, to judge me, or to decide what's best for us. Karen's eyes filled with tears. Adam, we didn't mean to hurt you. We were just worried. We thought we were helping. Well, you didn't help, I said firmly. You hurt me. And you've been doing it for years without even realizing it. I've always tried to be the one who keeps the peace, who makes everyone happy. But I can't do it anymore. I won't. Mark and Claire looked uncomfortable, and my mom wiped her eyes. What do you want us to do, Adam? She asked quietly. I want you to respect my boundaries, I said. I want you to stop meddling in my marriage. If Emily needs someone to talk to, she can talk to me, not you. And if you're going to talk about me, at least have the decency to do it with kindness. I deserve that much. They nodded, some reluctantly, others more sincerely. I could see the guilt on their faces, but it wasn't enough to erase the hurt. This conversation wouldn't fix everything, but it was a start. For the first time in years, I felt like I was standing up for myself, demanding the respect I should have demanded a long time ago. As the meeting wrapped up, I felt a mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and a lingering sense of betrayal. My family wasn't perfect, and neither was I. But I hoped that, moving forward, things could change. I hoped they'd learn to see me not as someone to judge, but as someone worth supporting. For now, though, I knew one thing: I wasn't going to let their opinions define me anymore. This was my life, my marriage, and my chance to make things right on my own terms. After the confrontation with my family, I felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. On one hand, I had finally spoken up for myself, something I'd avoided doing for years. But on the other hand, the weight of everything still lingered, their words, the betrayal, and the realization that I couldn't rely on them the way I used to. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living like this, constantly torn between trying to fix my marriage and trying to meet my family's expectations. Something had to change, and that change had to start with me. I decided to take a step back from my family. Not forever, but for now. I needed space to focus on what really mattered: my relationship with Emily. I had spent so much energy trying to be the peacekeeper, the dependable son and brother, that I had lost sight of what was most important. It wasn't easy. My mom texted me the next morning asking how I was doing, and it took everything in me not to fall back into the old routine of reassuring her. But I stuck to my decision. For the first time, I put my own needs first. With my family at a distance, I turned my attention to Emily. It wasn't easy to face the issues between us head-on, but I knew it was the only way forward. One evening after dinner, I sat down with her and said, "Emily, I think we need to have a real conversation. No holding back." She looked at me, a mix of curiosity and hesitation in her eyes. "Okay," she said, setting her phone down. "What do you want to talk about?" "Everything," I said. "How you're feeling, how I'm feeling, and what we can do to make things better. I don't want to keep guessing. I need to know the truth, even if it's hard to hear." Emily sighed, and for a moment, I thought she might brush me off. But then she surprised me. "I've been feeling really alone, Adam," she said quietly. "I know you've been trying, but for a long time I've felt like I've been carrying the weight of everything by myself, and it's exhausting." Her words hit me hard, but I forced myself to listen. "What do you mean by everything?" I asked gently. "I mean, the little things, the big things, all of it," she said, her voice tinged with frustration. "You're great at working hard and providing for us, but sometimes it feels like you're so focused on work or other people that you forget about me. Like I'm just here." I nodded slowly, trying to process what she was saying. "I never wanted you to feel like that," I said, "but I can see how I might have made you feel that way. I've always thought I was helping by working hard and keeping things stable, but I guess I didn't realize what you needed from me." Emily looked at me, her expression softening. "I think that's part of the problem," she said. "You assume a lot. You assume I'm okay, that I don't need help, that I'm happy as long as everything looks fine on the surface. But you don't ask. And sometimes I just need you to ask." Her words were like a wake-up call. I had spent so much time trying to be the person I thought she needed that I had never stopped to ask who she really needed me to be. "I'm sorry," I said sincerely. "I didn't realize how much I was missing. But I want to do better, Emily. I want us to do better." For the first time in a long time, it felt like we were on the same page. We talked for hours that night, diving into topics we had both avoided for far too long. Emily opened up about feeling isolated and overwhelmed, and I admitted how much pressure I had been putting on myself to be the perfect husband. It wasn't easy. There were tears, moments of frustration, and a lot of painful honesty, but it felt real. It felt like progress. Over the next few weeks, we started making small changes. I began setting boundaries with work, making sure I was home in time for dinner every night. We started going on walks together in the evenings, using that time to talk and reconnect. Emily, in turn, made an effort to share her feelings with me instead of bottling them up. It wasn't a magical fix, but it was a start. I also realized that focusing on myself wasn't selfish, it was necessary. I started taking time to reflect on who I was outside of my roles as a husband, a son, and a brother. I began journalism, something I hadn't done since college, and even started going to therapy to work through my own feelings of inadequacy. The more I worked on myself, the more I felt like I could show up for Emily in the way she deserved. As things began to improve between us, I felt a sense of hope I hadn't felt in a long time. Emily and I weren't perfect, and we still had a lot of work to do, but we were in it together. That made all the difference. For the first time in months, I felt like we were a team again. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, Emily turned to me and said, "I can see you're really trying, Adam, and I want you to know it means a lot to me." Her words brought a lump to my throat. "I'm not just trying for you," I said. "I'm trying for us. Because you're the most important person in my life, Emily, and I don't want to lose what we have." She smiled and rested her head on my shoulder. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. We weren't perfect, but we were moving forward, and for now, that was enough. Months later, life felt different, calmer, steadier, and more in my control. Emily and I had spent the last few months rebuilding our marriage, piece by piece. It wasn't easy, but the effort was worth it. We had learned how to communicate better, how to be honest without fear, and most importantly, how to work as a team again. The changes weren't dramatic, but they were meaningful. We weren't just coexisting anymore, we were truly connected. One evening, after dinner, Emily and I sat together on the couch, reflecting on how far we had come. "You know," she said, "I feel like I've gotten to know you all over again these past few months." I smiled, squeezing her hand. "I feel the same way. I think we both forgot how much we mean to each other, but I don't want us to lose this again. No matter what happens, I want us to keep working at it." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and in that moment, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but it was stronger. We had faced our struggles head on, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were truly partners. With things improving at home, I knew it was time to address another part of my life, my family. After months of keeping my distance, I decided I was ready to reconnect with them, but this time, it would be on my terms. I wasn't the same Adam who let their opinions and judgments dictate how I felt about myself. I had grown. I had set boundaries. And I wasn't going to tolerate being disrespected again. I texted my mom first, asking if we could have a family dinner. She responded almost immediately, clearly eager to see me again. Over the next few days, I arranged the gathering, making sure everyone could attend. When the evening came, I felt a mix of nerves and determination. I knew this conversation wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. When I walked into my parents' house, I was greeted with warm smiles and hugs. It felt familiar, but there was an underlying tension I couldn't ignore. My mom kept glancing at me, as if trying to gauge my mood, and Mark and Claire were quieter than usual. Once we sat down for dinner, I decided to get straight to the point. "I wanted to talk to all of you about what happened a few months ago," I began, setting down my fork. I've had a lot of time to think, and I need to say some things. The room went silent. My mom's smile faltered, and Mark and Claire exchanged uneasy glances. My dad sat back in his chair, his expression unreadable. I love all of you, I continued, but what happened that day hurt me deeply. Hearing the people I trust most say those things about me, about my marriage, was like a punch to the gut. I've spent my whole life trying to be there for this family, trying to make everyone happy. But in that moment, I realized something: I can't keep putting myself last. Karen, my mom, spoke up first. Adam, we never meant to hurt you. We were just worried about you and Emily. We didn't think. That's exactly the problem, Mom. I interrupted gently. You didn't think. You didn't think about how your words might affect me. You didn't think about how they might damage my relationship with Emily. I know you were trying to help, but it wasn't your place to get involved like that. Mark cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. Adam, I'm sorry for what I said. I wasn't thinking. I guess I just got caught up in the moment. Claire nodded. Same here. I know I can be careless with my words, but I never meant to hurt you. I'm really sorry. Their apologies felt genuine, but I wasn't ready to let them off the hook completely. I appreciate you saying that, I said, but I need you all to understand something. My marriage is between me and Emily. If we have problems, we'll deal with them together. I need you to respect that and stay out of it unless I ask for your input. Can you do that? They nodded, and my mom reached across the table to squeeze my hand. We'll do better, Adam, she said. I promise. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of closure. The wounds weren't completely healed, but this conversation was a step in the right direction. My family wasn't perfect, but they were willing to listen, and that was enough for now. Driving home that night, I felt lighter. I had finally stood up for myself, something I had avoided doing for far too long. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw Emily waiting for me on the porch. Her smile lit up the evening, and I felt a rush of gratitude for everything we had fought for. How did it go? She asked as I walked up to her. Better than I expected, I said, wrapping an arm around her. I think they finally understand where I'm coming from. She nodded, resting her head against my chest. I'm proud of you, Adam. You've come a long way. So had we. The betrayal I had felt months ago still lingered in the back of my mind, but it no longer defined me. Instead, it had pushed me to grow, to reevaluate my relationships, and to prioritize what truly mattered. My marriage was stronger, my boundaries were clearer, and my sense of self was more grounded than ever. As I stood there with Emily, watching the stars begin to appear in the night sky, I realized something important. Sometimes the hardest moments in life are the ones that teach us who we really are. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. I walked in on my family discussing my divorce, and what I heard broke me. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd question everything about his life at 32, but here I am. My name's Adam, and if I had to describe myself in one word, it would be dependable. I've spent my entire life trying to be the glue that holds things together, whether it's at work, in my marriage, or with my family. People always say I'm the one who can handle anything, the peacekeeper who avoids conflict and makes sure everyone is happy. But lately I've been wondering if that's a compliment or a curse. Let me tell you about my family. First, there's Mark, my older brother. He's successful in every way you can imagine: big house, fancy car, and a job that makes people nod in approval when they hear about it. Growing up, he was the golden child, and honestly, I don't think he ever really stepped out of that role. Then there's Claire, my younger sister. She's a free spirit, the type of person who lights up every room she walks into. Everyone adores her. She has this charm that lets her get away with anything, and responsibility just seems to slide off her like water off a duck's back. My parents, Karen and Robert, are, well, complicated. They're good people, don't get me wrong, but they have this way of making family togetherness feel like a chore. I'm a 26-year-old guy, and a few months ago, I inherited my grandparents' house. It's not a mansion or anything, but it's perfect. A cozy little place with a lot of character. My grandparents had spent decades taking care of it, filling it with antique furniture, vintage knickknacks, and a ton of sentimental items. It's the kind of place that feels like home the moment you step inside. My family, for the most part, is pretty close. We have our moments, though, especially when it comes to my Aunt Linda. She's 45 and has 3 kids, ages 7, 9, and 12. Linda's always been the type to think the world revolves around her. She means well sometimes, but her parenting style is basically letting her kids do whatever they want. It's not uncommon for family gatherings to turn into chaos because her kids are climbing furniture, spilling drinks, or breaking something. Most of the time, she just laughs it off and says, they're just being kids. Meanwhile, everyone else is left cleaning up the mess. A couple of weeks ago, Linda called me out of the blue. She said her house was getting some renovations done, and she needed a place to stay for the weekend with her kids. I hesitated because, honestly, the idea of those kids running loose in my grandparents' house made my stomach turn. But Linda was insistent. She promised the kids would be supervised, and it would just be for 2 nights. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Before they arrived, I made sure to set some ground rules. I told Linda outright that certain rooms were off limits, like the attic and my grandparents' old study. I also made it clear that the kids weren't to touch anything fragile or valuable. Linda waved it off like it was no big deal and assured me they'd be on their best behavior. When they showed up on Friday evening, it was like a tornado hit my front door. The kids burst inside, shouting and running in different directions before Linda even got her bags out of the car. I tried to keep calm and reminded everyone about the rules. Linda nodded absent-mindedly, already scrolling through her phone. Within the first hour, I caught the youngest kid jumping on my couch while the middle one was trying to climb a bookshelf. I told them to stop, but Linda just chuckled and said, "Oh, don't mind them. They're just excited." I had a bad feeling, but I didn't want to start a fight. so I let it go. Later that night, while I was in the kitchen, I heard a loud oops from the living room. I rushed in to find juice spilled all over a vintage rug my grandparents had brought back from a trip overseas. I grabbed some towels and started blotting the stain, trying not to let my frustration show. Linda barely looked up from her phone and muttered something about kids being messy. By the time I went to bed, I was exhausted. But the night wasn't over yet. Around midnight, I heard footsteps and whispers coming from upstairs. I followed the noise to find all three kids in the attic, surrounded by old photo albums and boxes of keepsakes. The attic was supposed to be locked, but somehow, they had managed to get in. When I asked what they were doing, they shrugged and said they were exploring. Linda's response? They're curious. It's good for them to learn about family history. The next morning, the damage became even more apparent. A vase that had been on the dining room table was in pieces on the floor. There were scratches all over the dining table itself, and several kitchen appliances had been pulled out and left scattered across the counters. I confronted Linda about it, but she just rolled her eyes and said, "It's just stuff. You can replace it." Things hit a breaking point on Saturday afternoon. I had to run to the store to grab a few things, and when I came back, I found the kids in the backyard. They had gotten into my shed, pulled out some tools, and were using them to build something. In the process, they managed to break a section of my fence and shatter a window on the patio door. I was livid. When I demanded that Linda take responsibility, she turned it around on me. She said I should have kid-proofed the house if I didn't want anything broken. She accused me of being too uptight and making her feel unwelcome. Instead of staying for the rest of the weekend, she announced they were leaving early. She packed up her kids, and by the time they drove off, I was left standing in my backyard, surrounded by the mess they had made. Now I'm stuck trying to figure out how to handle this. The house is more than just a building to me, it's a piece of my family's history. Seeing it disrespected like this is infuriating, but I don't know how to make Linda understand that. I've never been the confrontational type, but I don't think I can just let this go. Update 1. The next morning, I went through the house to assess the damage. I had already seen the broken fence and shattered patio window, but as I walked through each room, the full extent of the destruction became clear. The vintage rug in the living room was stained beyond repair. My grandparents' dining table had deep scratches across the surface, and one of the dining chairs was missing a piece of the backrest. In the kitchen, several small appliances had been knocked over, and a cupboard door hung loosely on its hinges. When I made it to the study, I froze. The vintage clock that had sat on the mantel for decades, a clock my grandparents cherished, was lying on the floor, shattered. Its delicate glass face was cracked, and the hands were bent at odd angles. It felt like a punch to the gut. That clock wasn't just an heirloom, it was one of the last tangible connections I had to them. I took photos of everything, documenting the damage from every angle. I texted Linda later that day. I explained what I'd found and asked her to cover the cost of repairs. Her response came almost immediately, a string of laughing emojis followed by, "Kids are kids. What do you expect?" She didn't offer to pay for anything, didn't apologize, just brushed it all off like it was nothing. When I told my parents what had happened, they tried to play peacemakers. They said I should let it go for the sake of family harmony. My dad suggested that things can be replaced and reminded me how Linda was a single mom who was already under a lot of stress. My mom told me I was being too harsh and needed to move past it. Some other relatives chimed in as well, saying I should have known better than to let Linda and her kids stay in the house in the first place. It was clear people were picking sides. I wasn't about to let this slide, though. I called a few repair companies to get estimates for fixing the fence, the patio window, and the dining table. Altogether, it came to just over $3,000. I forwarded the estimates to Linda, hoping it might push her to take responsibility. Instead, she went on the offensive. Within hours, she posted a long rant on Facebook, accusing me of being anti-family and exaggerating the damage to make her look bad. She painted herself as a victim, claiming she and her kids were treated like criminals in my home. I started getting messages from relatives, some siding with Linda, others expressing quiet support for me but saying they didn't want to get involved. Then, out of nowhere, one of my cousins, Linda's niece, reached out. She told me this wasn't the first time Linda had pulled something like this. Apparently, Linda had a history of letting her kids destroy other people's property and then refusing to take responsibility. My cousin even shared a few stories from her own experiences, which made me feel a little less alone in dealing with this. A friend of mine suggested I talk to a lawyer. At first, I thought it was overkill, but the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like the only way to hold Linda accountable. I scheduled a consultation and started pulling together all the evidence I had, photos of the damage, repair estimates, and the texts Linda had sent me. Meanwhile, Linda wasn't done. She sent me another text, dripping with sarcasm. "You've always been too sensitive. Grow up." It felt like she was daring me to take things further, like she thought I wouldn't actually stand up to her. I decided to update Reddit about everything that had happened. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of people weighed in, sharing similar stories and urging me to take legal action. Some recommended small claims court, while others suggested cutting ties with Linda altogether. My parents, worried about how this was escalating, suggested a family meeting to mediate. I didn't want to go, but they convinced me it would be better than letting things drag on. When the day came, it was a disaster from the start. Linda brought her kids, who immediately started running wild, ignoring everyone's attempts to keep them under control. During the discussion, Linda accused me of setting her up to fail by letting her stay in a house that wasn't kid-friendly. She refused to take responsibility for anything and made it clear she wasn't going to pay for the damages. Just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, my uncle Linda's brother stepped in. He offered to cover part of the costs to end the drama. While I appreciated the gesture, it felt wrong to let him take the fall for Linda's behavior. Still, it was the first time someone in the family had openly acknowledged that Linda was in the wrong. That meeting solidified my decision. Letting Linda off the hook would only reinforce her entitlement. I wasn't going to let her walk away from this without facing some consequences. I told my parents and uncle that I appreciated their efforts to mediate, but I had already decided to pursue legal action. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about standing up for myself and protecting my grandparents' legacy. Let me know if you'd like any adjustments or additional details added to the update. Update 2. After the disaster of the family meeting, I went ahead and filed a small claims court case against Linda. It wasn't a decision I made lightly, but after everything that had happened, the damage, the deflection, the social media posts, I knew this was the only way forward. The filing process was straightforward. I submitted the evidence I'd gathered, photos of the broken items, repair estimates, and copies of our text exchanges. The court date was set for 3 weeks later. When Linda found out, she exploded. My phone lit up with messages, each one more hostile than the last. She called me a traitor and said I was tearing the family apart. She even accused me of trying to ruin her life out of spite. Then, in typical Linda fashion, she threatened to cut me out of her life entirely, as if that was supposed to scare me. My parents weren't happy about the legal action either. They called to plead with me, asking if I really wanted to go through with this. My mom kept saying how hard this was for the family and how my grandparents would have hated to see us fighting. My dad tried to convince me to drop the case, saying it wasn't worth the permanent damage it would do to our relationships. I listened, but I didn't change my mind. Over the next few days, I focused on preparing for court. I printed out all the photos, including the shattered clock and the broken fence, and made a timeline of events. I included the repair estimates and highlighted the dismissive texts Linda had sent me. My cousins came through for me too. The one who had reached out earlier helped me gather statements from other family members who had dealt with Linda's entitlement in the past. Their stories painted a clear picture of someone who never took responsibility for her actions. Meanwhile, Reddit was a lifeline. After I updated my post, the response was overwhelming. People shared similar experiences, offered advice, and even linked me to resources about small claims court. Some users sent private messages with tips on presenting my case. The support was like a tidal wave, and it made me feel more confident about standing my ground. Linda wasn't sitting idle, though. She doubled down on her campaign to paint herself as the victim. Her Facebook posts became more frequent, each one more dramatic than the last. She claimed I was trying to bankrupt her and accused me of being heartless. She even implied I was doing this because I hated her kids. It was clear her audience was divided. Some people in the comments supported her, but others started calling her out, asking for the full story. Then the guilt trip started. One evening, I got a package in the mail. Inside were 3 handwritten letters, one from each of Linda's kids. At first, I thought they might be genuine, but as I read them, it became obvious they were coached. The letters apologized for the trouble, but blamed me for making things harder on their mom. It was a low blow, but I refused to engage. As the court date approached, Linda's lawyer reached out with a settlement offer. She offered to pay a small fraction of the repair costs if I agreed to drop the case. It wasn't even close to covering the damages, and I turned it down. This wasn't just about the money anymore, it was about accountability. The day of the trial came quickly. Linda showed up in full dramatic mode, playing the part of a single mom being unfairly targeted. She denied everything, claiming the damage wasn't as bad as I made it out to be, and that I was only suing her out of spite. But her story fell apart the moment I presented my evidence. The photos and repair estimates spoke for themselves, and the judge wasn't impressed by Linda's excuses. Her attempt to shift blame didn't hold up against the timeline I'd meticulously laid out. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor. Linda was ordered to pay the full amount of damages plus court fees. It was a huge relief, but the aftermath was just as messy as I expected. Some family members called to congratulate me, saying it was about time someone stood up to Linda. Others accused me of being heartless and petty. The divide in the family was more obvious than ever. I updated Reddit that evening, sharing the outcome with everyone who had been following the story. The response was incredible. People were thrilled to see justice served and flooded the comments with support. Some even called it a victory for everyone dealing with entitled family members. Linda, predictably, didn't take the ruling well. She blocked me on every platform and started spreading rumors about me to anyone who would listen. I ignored it all. I was done trying to reason with her or repair the relationship. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of closure. I had done everything I could to stand up for myself and protect what my grandparents had left behind. Whatever came next, I was ready to move forward without Linda's drama hanging over me. Update 3. After the court ruling, Linda was ordered to pay the full damages and court fees, but things didn't exactly move forward smoothly. Weeks passed, and there was no sign of payment. Linda claimed financial hardship, which didn't surprise me at all. She was consistent in one thing: avoiding responsibility. I debated my options, including garnishing her wages, but I didn't want to escalate things too quickly. For now, I decided to wait and see if she'd comply on her own. The delay didn't go unnoticed by the family. Tensions flared as the divide became more apparent. Some family members openly supported me, saying Linda needed to be held accountable for her actions. Others accused me of overreacting and ruining the family dynamic. At one point, my mom called to say she wished I'd just drop everything and move on. My dad echoed similar sentiments, trying to convince me it wasn't worth the continued drama. In the middle of all this, my uncle, Linda's brother, stepped in again. He contacted her and tried to reason with her, urging her to pay up and avoid further embarrassment. I wasn't in the loop on exactly how that conversation went, but shortly after, Linda sent me a partial payment. It wasn't even half of what she owed, but it was enough to show she was at least acknowledging the ruling, barely. Then, out of nowhere, I got a message from a distant cousin. They told me Linda had just bought a brand new TV and booked a vacation for her and the kids. This was the same person who was pleading financial hardship to avoid paying what she owed. I was floored but not surprised. I saved the screenshots my cousin sent, knowing they might come in handy later. Meanwhile, Linda wasn't backing down on her social media antics. She kept posting vague statuses about betrayal and being let down by family. The posts didn't mention me by name, but everyone knew who they were about. A few mutual friends sent me screenshots, shaking their heads at the ridiculousness of it all. It was clear she was playing the victim card for all it was worth. Through all this, my cousins and friends were a solid support system. One weekend, a few of them organized a small get-together to cheer me up. We spent the evening reminiscing about family events, and they reminded me I wasn't alone in this mess. It was exactly what I needed at the time, especially when I was starting to feel the weight of the situation. At home, I found myself spending more time restoring some of my grandparents' damaged items. Fixing the heirloom clock took weeks, but when I finally hung it back on the wall, it felt like a small victory. As I worked, I thought about my grandparents and the values they instilled in our family. It was hard not to feel conflicted, wondering how they'd feel about the ongoing drama. One morning, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Linda's oldest child, the 12-year-old. The letter was surprisingly heartfelt and honest. They apologized for their behavior during the visit and said they now understood how much trouble it had caused. It felt genuine, not like the coach letters Linda had sent before. I appreciated the gesture and decided to hold on to it as a reminder that not everyone in this situation was hopeless. The next family gathering was awkward, to say the least. Linda avoided me entirely, but her kids seemed genuinely apologetic. They stayed out of trouble and even helped clear the table after dinner. It was a stark contrast to the chaos they had caused at my house. Update 4. With the wage garnishment process underway, life finally started to quiet down. While Linda had yet to fully comply with the court ruling, the steady stream of small payments trickling in through the garnishment gave me some closure. Still, the emotional toll of everything lingered. The family drama, the constant tension at gatherings, and the awkward conversations with relatives left their mark. To deal with it all, I decided to start therapy. I hadn't realized how much stress I was carrying until I began talking to a professional. They helped me sort through the guilt from family backlash and the frustration of dealing with Linda's entitled behavior. Slowly, I learned to let go of the things I couldn't control. Then something unexpected happened. Linda's oldest child, the 12-year-old who had sent me the heartfelt letter, reached out again. This time, they offered to help repair some of the damage to my house, specifically the fence. I was surprised but appreciated the gesture. It felt genuine, so I agreed. On a sunny Saturday, the two of us worked side by side, hammering nails and replacing broken planks. It wasn't perfect, but by the end of the day, the fence was back in one piece. The moment felt like a small step forward. Seeing the effort from someone so young gave me a glimmer of hope that maybe not everything in this situation was irreparable. Of course, Linda caught wind of the fence repair and wasn't happy about it. She accused me of manipulating her kids against her and started spinning more stories about how I was turning the family against her. I didn't bother responding. By this point, I had decided to enforce strict boundaries. I let Linda know she was no longer welcome in my home unless she fully paid the damages. It wasn't about pettiness, it was about protecting myself and the legacy my grandparents left behind. The next family gathering brought another round of drama. Linda, clearly still fuming, tried to publicly shame me during dinner. She went on about how I had treated her unfairly and made her feel like an outcast. But this time, she didn't get the support she was expecting. Other family members stepped in, pointing out her long history of entitled behavior. One of my uncles even reminded her about past incidents where she had refused to take responsibility for similar situations. For once, I wasn't the one defending myself, others were doing it for me. Around this time, I started dating someone new. They were kind, supportive, and helped me see things from a healthier perspective. They encouraged me to focus on the relationships that mattered and let go of the toxic ones. With their help, I began to see the value in cutting Linda out of my life entirely if she continued to bring nothing but negativity. Meanwhile, Linda's behavior started catching up with her. People who had previously defended her began to see through her manipulative tactics. She faced more backlash from family and friends who were tired of her playing the victim. It wasn't long before her social circle started shrinking. The ripple effect from my situation seemed to inspire some changes in the family dynamic. Relatives who had sided with Linda initially began reaching out to me, apologizing for their reactions and acknowledging her behavior. A few even offered to help repair the strained relationships. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but it felt like progress. Months later, I received a text from Linda. It was short and lacked any real accountability. She said she was ready to move on and hoped we could put everything behind us. It wasn't the apology I had hoped for, but by then I realized I didn't need her acknowledgement to find closure. I thanked her for finally completing the payments, which she had only done after I threatened further legal action, and left it at that. Back at home, I focused on restoring the damaged heirlooms. The vintage clock my grandparents had cherished was finally fully repaired and looked as good as new. It felt like a symbolic moment, bringing the house and their legacy back to life. I hung the clock on the wall and took a step back, feeling a renewed connection to the home and its history. The family dynamic shifted noticeably after everything that had happened. More people began standing up to Linda, refusing to tolerate her behavior. It was clear that her actions had consequences far beyond just my situation. In a way, confronting her had started a domino effect, inspiring others to push back against her entitlement. For my part, I decided to close this chapter for good. I posted a final update on Reddit, thanking everyone for their support throughout the ordeal. The community had been an incredible source of advice, encouragement, and shared experiences. I told them how much I'd learned about setting boundaries and prioritizing my peace and well-being over toxic relationships. As I moved forward, I knew one thing for sure. My grandparents' house wasn't just a place. It was a reminder of the strength and values they had instilled in me. It was my home, my sanctuary, and I was determined to protect it, no matter what. Update 5. After months of dealing with Linda's chaos, I finally decided to cut all ties. The no-contact decision wasn't something I broadcasted. I simply stopped engaging with her entirely. No more texts, no social media interactions, no acknowledging her attempts to stir up drama. Life without her constant negativity felt lighter. Almost like a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had been lifted. Without Linda's interference, I started focusing on the relationships that truly mattered. My cousins and I grew closer, especially the ones who had been supportive throughout the ordeal. We started meeting up more often, talking about everything from family memories to future plans. These connections felt stronger now, forged in the fire of shared frustration and mutual support. Linda, of course, didn't disappear entirely. She kept up her vague, passive-aggressive posts on Facebook, talking about being betrayed by people she thought she could trust. I heard about it through the grapevine, but I didn't engage. I had learned the hard way that responding only gave her more fuel. Ignoring her was the best choice, and it worked. Over time, her posts became less frequent, and I stopped hearing about them altogether. With the payments finally complete, I turned my attention to restoring the house. The repairs were already done, but I wanted to bring the place back to its former charm. I replaced old wallpaper, repainted the trim, and even refinished some of the furniture. Each project made the house feel more like mine, while still honoring my grandparents' memory. I also framed a restored photo of them and hung it in the living room, a quiet but powerful symbol of closure and strength. Therapy was a huge part of this chapter too. It helped me see how much the incident had pushed me to grow. Setting boundaries, even when it meant conflict, wasn't something I was used to. But now, I could see how necessary it was, not just with Linda, but in all areas of my life. This newfound confidence started showing up elsewhere. I began advocating for myself more at work, taking on leadership roles I'd shied away from before. Even in my personal life, I felt more secure in standing up for what I believed in. I also found ways to channel my experience into helping others. Through a local community group, I got involved in projects aimed at supporting people dealing with family conflicts and toxic relationships. Sharing my story, without naming names, helped others see they weren't alone. It felt good to take something so stressful and turn it into something positive. The house became a peaceful haven again, and I decided to host a family gathering without Linda. It was the first time I'd opened my doors to the extended family since the ordeal began. Everyone who came respected the space, and we created new, positive memories together. It felt like a fresh start, a reminder that family could still be a source of joy when the right people were involved. Meanwhile, Linda's behavior started catching up with her. Her pattern of entitlement and deflection alienated more and more family members. Relatives who had once defended her began distancing themselves, tired of her constant drama. By the end of it, Linda was isolated, with fewer allies than ever before. It wasn't something I took pleasure in, it just felt like the natural consequence of her actions. Linda's oldest child, however, stayed in touch. They continued to grow into a responsible teenager, actively breaking away from the cycle of entitlement. We kept things casual, texts now and then, occasional visits, but it was clear they wanted to maintain a connection. Seeing that shift gave me hope that the next generation could break free from the toxic patterns that had plagued our family for years. As I reflected on everything, I realized how much this ordeal had taught me. Standing up for myself hadn't been easy, but it was necessary. It showed me the importance of protecting my peace, even when it meant tough decisions. The lessons weren't just about Linda, they were about life, relationships, and the boundaries that keep both healthy. Reddit played a big role in this journey too. After posting my final update, I was flooded with messages from people sharing their own stories. Many thanked me for showing them it was okay to confront toxic family members. Some even said my story gave them the courage to set boundaries they'd been avoiding for years. Knowing I had helped others made everything feel worthwhile. Now, I'm ready to move forward. I've started planning trips I'd put off for too long, diving into hobbies I'd neglected, and dreaming about the future without Linda's drama weighing me down. Life feels lighter, freer, and full of possibilities.